Well, it's not even quite August yet. Almost, but not quite. And I've already gotten a fair amount of mileage out of the national political landscape in terms of illustrative material for sermons, as well as a window through which to maybe look at ourselves or to gain insight into matters of the spirit, the mind, the heart. As you know, unless you've had your head in the sand someplace, we've now been through the conventions of both major parties. If you've watched either convention, you no doubt heard the message loud and clear that that party's candidate is Mother Teresa and the other party's candidate is Adolf Hitler. And gender aside, you've heard that from both parties. So the question is, which one is right? Don't answer that. In fact, I have no intention of answering either. Well, maybe that's not quite true. I will answer the question with some further questions. Is it possible that neither of them is right? That was a rhetorical question, but thank you for that. Thank you for that affirmation. At least to the degree that one of them is Mother Teresa and the other is Adolf Hitler. In that perspective, I'm glad that you resonate with that answer. I won't point out the people who are not smiling or laughing. Is it possible that there are agendas on both sides that mask the truth? Is it possible that all of the other speakers at each convention who are telling us all the wonderful things about their candidate and all the things they're going to do and all the reasons why the other candidate is evil, is it possible that there's an agenda? Like maybe staying in power, among other things. Maybe not to a person. I believe there are people who really believe in the principles that they're articulating. At least one or two, I think, are probably present at each convention. I know I'm sounding cynical, and I apologize for that. But is it possible that the answer to which one is right, that the answer to the truth of the matter is somewhere in between those two extremes? I think it's pretty likely. And is it possible that we as a nation, that until we can understand that the truth is somewhere in between those extremes, that we will never truly move forward in solving many of the complex issues that face us as a nation? Many years ago, I had an opportunity to preach in a church whose pastor had recently resigned. At that time, the church was still somewhat divided and maybe in a degree of conflict over their recent history. And it didn't take long in conversations with some of its members to sense that about a quarter of the congregation had felt the former pastor could simply do nothing right. And perhaps a quarter of the church felt that he could do nothing wrong. I kind of assumed that the answer was probably somewhere in the middle of those extremes, as it is with most churches and pastors, present company included. Well, I'm reminded of children fighting. Never happened in our home. That's not true. One person says he started it. The other one said, no, he started it. Which one is right? Technically, maybe one of them, but, really the answer is probably somewhere in between those two extremes. Well, as is usually the case, my concern this morning is not primarily with politics, although I do care deeply about this nation of which we are a part. My concern is not primarily with the effort of a particular church to move past a chapter in its history, although that could certainly be relevant to any church in our efforts to be faithful in following Christ, caring for one another, serving the world around us. Nor is my concern this morning primarily to come alongside of parents with young children and help equip them for their struggles that they face every day, although that too is important and is certainly within the scope of our journey together. Now, this morning in particular, I want to talk about faith. Specifically, I want to talk about the Christian faith, and I realize that I may be preaching to the choir this morning because you are here. But I think there's still a message that we can all hear. We have a small group in our Sunday school, one of our Sunday school classes, talking about our outreach as a church, looking at a book that talks about growing the church from the outside in, trying to help understand the mindset of those who are outside the church. So maybe we can better build bridges of relationship with them and better share with them the life of Christ that we've come to know. And as that is part of our calling of all of us as followers of Christ, I think this message can have some relevance to us. I want us to put ourselves in the seat, perhaps, of the undecideds of our community who are watching our conventions. Get the connection? Except ours aren't annual. We have them every week. You're in one. But it's so much more than that. And you know, politics, wouldn't it be nice if it was only 1 week out of the year? Oh, I thought I'd get a big amen to that one. But no, it goes on all week. There's ads, there's news cycles. It just... At least in an election year, it just never stops. But I want us to try to put ourselves in the seat of the undecideds, or perhaps even among the members of the other party. Well, what would that be in the context now of talking about our Christian faith? What would the other party be? Well, if there's the Christian faith, then there's the undecideds, then the other party would be the decideds. Not in favor of the Christian faith, right? Okay. I sense you're with me here. And I want us to understand a little bit of what sometimes the undecideds or the decidedly unbelievers, the impression that they get of some of our conventions, if you will, of what we're about, of the agendas that they might sense at different times, of the things that they might see that make them, just like in politics, say, absolutely not. I don't care what's on the other side, but I'm running as far away from that as I can. I think of some of the faces that are presented. I think of what Sarah shared several weeks ago from her time in the Middle East and how so many people in the Middle East and people in Muslim countries and Muslim communities, that the face of Christianity that they see is desperate housewives. And you say, what? But it's so true. And we say, well, I can't do much to help that. If it's not that, you say, well, they should turn on some, if they're going to watch television and get their impression of Christianity from television, don't watch sitcoms, don't watch dramas, don't watch that. Turn on the preachers, right? Thank you, David. There's some really good Bible teaching, some really good expressions of what I understand to be the heart of Christ and the heart of God expressed through His Word on television and radio. But boy, you've got to look for them. And I don't mean this in any way to put myself above anyone else. I see reports of, take your pick, the 10 wealthiest preachers in America or around the world. And you read about and talk about the face of Christianity, you see that some of these ministries have tens of millions of followers worldwide. And the money that pours in, and you have these $50 and more million empires, and you have multiple personal jets, and you have all of this, and that's the face of Christianity for so many. And the message that comes through is you too can have all of this. If you keep buying my books and buying my CDs, and you keep supporting our ministry, and you keep listening, and that's the face of Christianity. And according to several lists, out of the top 6 being the wealthiest preachers in the world, do you know where 3 of them were from? You're going to assume, from the U.S., right? This was shocking. 3 of them were from Nigeria. We know some of the poverty, the struggles that have been going on in Nigeria. Our sister church in Nigeria, it's mind-boggling. And yet to see the followers, see that face of Christianity in the midst of that conflict. But we don't have to point our fingers at other countries. We've got it here, and it's not just television, it's not just that face. We could talk about the news cycles that picks up on the likes of Westboro Baptist Church and what they feel like their calling is, and the hatred and the bigotry that they show at every turn. And I'd like to say that's an isolated case. But we've got the whole continuum. And maybe it's not even what's on the media. Maybe for each individual person among the undecideds, maybe for each individual person among the decided unbelievers, it's not even about those things. Maybe for them it's about that one relative or that one neighbor who comes across as being too eccentric, too hateful, too legalistic, too obnoxious, too judgmental, too hypocritical. And then the question comes, is there any possibility that I am that neighbor or relative to somebody else? What I want us to think about this morning, having started with the political spectrum and then brought this to where we are in living out our faith, is what often happens in the political spectrum is we feel the need to rush to the other furthest corner when we see something that we're so unwilling to be part of on either side for whatever reason. And we no longer care to be critical about this other side. All we're concerned about is I'm not going to be part of that. And we begin to understand how many people in the world have looked at their experience of the Christian faith, however imperfect, however wrong and misleading it might be, have looked at their impression, their experience of the Christian faith and say, I don't care. I don't care what else. I'm not going to be part of that. But I want to suggest that even though they've got a point, we talked about this in our Sunday school class, a lot like Gandhi was quoted as having said in an interview, and whether it's true or not, it's consistent, I think, perhaps with other things that he had said, was he has no problem with Christ. In fact, he likes Christ. It's the followers of Christ that seem so unlike Christ. And so what often happens? We rush to the other side. And what is on the other extreme? I mean, we know in the political spectrum, we've seen that as we bounce from one to the other. And as some of you echoed this morning, you might feel caught in the middle. But in matters of faith, what is the other extreme? There is no God. There is no purpose. There is no basis for morality or compassion or respect. There's only time and chance. Everything else, everything is ultimately meaningless. Is it possible that there's truth somewhere in the middle? I'm counting on it. I believe absolutely there is. For those recoiling against those expressions of the Christian faith, that is not Christ. I would encourage people to go back to the Scriptures, to read the Gospels. I would encourage those who name the name of Christ to reevaluate our lives and say, am I contributing in some way to that picture of the Christian faith? Have I gotten away from following Christ in every area of my life? If Mahatma Gandhi had met me, would he have said the same thing? Would I have given him more reason to say, I like Christ, but not his followers? Or would I have been that one exception in his circle of acquaintances? Individually and collectively as a church, I think we need always to be humbly critical, self-critical, humbly inviting of God to search our hearts and to show us, humbly open to learning, to seeing more clearly the life of Christ, and to questioning, have I living that out in all of my relationships? How am I reflecting that? The person who might look at me to decide about the Christian faith, how would that impact them? What impression does that leave them with? Does it make them want to run the other way as far as they possibly can? But on the other extreme, I'm not suggesting that we have to abandon science, abandon reason, because I don't believe those are fully present at the other extreme either. So often that's the impression that we get, that it's either choosing between faith expressed by this extreme, or reason and science expressed by that extreme. But to me, there's just so much evidence around us. The wonders of the human body, the earth, the known universe, the telescopic, the microscopic. It is just so amazing and incredible. It screams out for a designer. Even at its most extreme, evolutionists still cannot answer the question of first cause. And maybe we do a disservice by not engaging in conversation. Maybe we do a disservice by saying, well, if that's what science is going to say, then we don't want anything to do with science. Science at its best is studying this universe that God has created. It's an opportunity to deepen our worship of the Creator. We don't have to fear it. Is it possible? Is it possible that some of the things that we've learned in science, maybe we don't understand exactly how they fit with the scriptures that are the rule of our faith, but is it possible that they fit better than we've maybe understood in the past? And I'm not suggesting exactly how that works. There's a lot of issues with the theory of evolution that affect me, not because of Genesis, but because it doesn't line up for me. But there are probably some other things that are part of that whole theory and other things that have been discovered that I don't have to be afraid of. And maybe by the church taking this either-or posture, taking this extreme posture, taking this posture that says it has to be exactly like this in spite of what you're seeing through the telescope or through the microscope, maybe we've contributed to this feeling that it's either-or, rather than finding ways to build bridges, to say, let's come together and talk. Maybe we haven't presented a complete and accurate picture of the Creator whom we profess, the Creator in whom we believe. But maybe He's bigger than the limits of our minds up to this point. It's not just the scientific evidence that I feel is out there in the world that argue and scream for design. It's history. It's biblical history. It's the historical evidence that still exists and screams loudly for the life, the death, the resurrection of Christ. And we can have a degree of confidence that there is historical evidence, there is historical testimony to support our faith. We can be encouraged and have confidence that there is scientific evidence that the Old Testament scriptures preceded the time of Christ. And that those Old Testament scriptures, which were by scientific investigation present and written prior to the time of Christ by at least a few hundred years, have records of things like Isaiah 53 that talks about one who was despised and rejected, one who would take upon himself the sin of the world, one who was bruised for our iniquities. And so much more in those scriptures testifying to the one who would come. We're not just talking about man-made fairy tales. We're talking about a faith that has substance, a faith that is not inconsistent with the test of reason and the test of science. At least at some level. No, we can't prove everything. But once again, isn't the truth somewhere in the middle of these extremes? And as the Church of Christ, what does that mean for us to recognize that? What does that mean for us about the way we seek to follow Christ every day, individually and collectively? What does that mean for us as we seek to engage others in the world, as we seek to be witnesses for Christ? Is there another way besides being caught up in this extreme? Or saying, I don't want anything to do with that. We see mass exoduses of young people from our churches. What are they running away from? Is there questions we need to ask? Are there things in our lives that are setting up this impossible choice? That it's either this or abandon it all. And there are times to make a choice. But I think these are important and hard and challenging and yet hopeful questions for the church to ask in this time and in this age, and to seek God's wisdom and God's guidance. Interestingly, Christ came into a context where even in the religious community we kind of had these polar opposites. You had the Pharisees who were all about the rules and who were kind of like that extreme segment in some aspects of Christianity around the world. You had the other who were much more the Sadducees, much more secular, and kind of denied that God was active in the world today. Jesus, in that case, I wouldn't say the truth was exactly in the middle, but it's certainly neither one of those came anywhere near to reflecting the heart of Christ, the heart of God that Christ revealed. And no wonder people found his teaching so powerful and unlike anything else that they'd heard. May God help the church. May God help us as individuals to be like Christ in that regard. May God help us to resist the unnecessary polarizations, to evaluate what obstacles we put up, where we are contributing to the impression of followers of Christ, to the hypocrisy, to the judgmentalism, to the obnoxious behavior, to all of that. May it not be said of those who know us, I like Christ, but his followers are so unlike him. I've raised a lot of questions this morning, and hopefully this is just a contribution to more thought and more deliberation among all of us. But in all of the clutter of the world around us, may we come back to the truths that we shared together earlier in our service this morning. That there is a God who made the world and everything in it. He is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by human hands. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From him have come all the nations that they should inhabit the earth. He's marked out appointed times and boundaries. He did all of this so that we might seek him and reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from us. For in him we live and move and have our being. Can we come back to the simplicity of Micah 6? To seek justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. If that was the face that the world saw more than anything else, I'm not sure that they would feel the need to run the other way. May Christ be more fully lived and visible in our lives for his glory and for the good of the undecideds, the good of the decided other party around us as they watch.